is time. Welcome to today's webinar on getting ahead of the next wave of customer expectations, brought to you by CCW Digital and Zendesk. I'm Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst for CCW, and your host for today's discussion. You don't have to look very far to hear about change and evolution within the customer contact space. We constantly hear about digital transformations. We routinely hear about the AI revolution. We always encounter dialogue about competing on the customer experience with a combination of convenience and personalization and empathy. But the irony is that even though these sound great, they sound transformative, they sound so pro-customer, so much of this discussion, so much of this debate and discourse is happening inside the boardroom. It's a discussion between business leaders, and it's an exercise in inside-out decision-making. If customer centricity is really the goal, we have to flip the script. We have to start rooting our priorities in what customers actually want. How do they actually feel? What are they truly demanding? What do they look for as it relates to the evolution of technology and the future of customer interactions? Because as it turns out, they have their own thoughts on what concepts like personalization should look like. They have their own perspectives on the value of AI. And they have their own expectations for what an agent should perform like in this era of consultative care. And most importantly, it's not just that they have their own expectations right now. Those preferences, those ideas, they're constantly evolving. They're constantly changing as customers say, hey, I want a new standard. I want something different. I want something better. So how are customer opinions trending? What can we do to anticipate future evolutions and stay ahead of the curve? What does it mean for the way we manage our people, our processes, and technologies? This webinar is going to reveal the answers. It's going to dive deep into data showcasing everything we know about where customer interactions are going and everything we can do to make them better, to make them stronger, to make them more customer-centric. I can't wait to dive in. But before we do so, we have to take a moment to meet our speaker. So I've worked with him many times in the past, and if there's a guy to help you navigate the very murky, very evolving, very changing, very flux customer experience landscape, it's Keith Pierce. So presently, Keith Pierce is the SVP of Product Marketing. He leads global go-to-market strategy across CX industry solutions at Zendesk. He's a creative, high-tech marketing leader with over 20 years of cloud and enterprise software and sales experience. He's held roles at Gain Insight and Alteryx and Genesys and Salesforce. If you are in the space, if you work with tech providers, odds are good you've encountered him because he's been everywhere. He's advised so much change, so much innovation, and I can't wait to get to know him and his insights. But I hyped you up there, Keith. I want to see if you could do anything better, anything I left out, anything more you want to share about your background.
Look,
here.
I mean, you're a great hype man, Brian, and you're hyping the webinar. And I'm not going to top that. I would just say thrilled to be here. I've loved doing these with you before. I love this community that you nurture with CCW. These are my people. And to your point about let's take the boardroom conversation down to the service leaders in this community. Like, I'm all in. Let's get real. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Definitely thrilled to have you as well. So I want to start off with a high-level question. It's straightforward, but that doesn't mean it's easy because there's a lot of ways to analyze this. And unfortunately, some of the analysis is probably not going to be overly positive, but we have to know where we are. We have to know what's going on in order to improve. So I want to start by asking you, what do you see as the current state of the customer experience? How do customers right now feel about the interactions they're having with brands?
Yeah, I'll just start with, we do some of our own research. We have a CX Trends report. It's a pretty good index to the market on how things are going. And before I tell you the data and the results, I've always found, and I'm not sure what your listeners share on this, but consumer sentiment overall tracks pretty closely with customer satisfaction. In other words, those macro factors impacting people, economic factors, government shutdowns, holiday seasons, it's very hard for your service experience to overcome that sort of environment. So that's just one thing to acknowledge is that that's a little bit of a headwind for us right now for all the reasons we're reading about every day. To our data in the CX Trends report, about 30% of the customers we surveyed said, hey, acknowledge the experience is getting better from companies. They're investing, it's more positive. But obviously that leaves the 70% who didn't say that, and they're still saying room for improvement. So that's kind of the state of, if you will.
Yeah, and I think we see similar stats on our side. It's not that, oh my God, every experience is terrible, every customer's jumping ship, but I think we definitely see room for improvement, especially when customers are getting so much messaging, being bombarded with this idea that this is the era of customer centricity. This is what brands are valuing. They're told that they're supposed to be empowered. They're supposed to demand what happens, that everything is about them. And then they deal with an interaction where they're told no, where they're told, hey, it's hard to get a refund, or we're told policy doesn't support this, or like you said, they don't get protection when things go wrong, and brands don't come to their defense. They blame things like supply shortages or the shutdown or whatever it may happen to not deliver the experience they're looking for, and that sends the wrong message. It may not be the worst experience ever, but it sends a message that maybe the customer and what they want is not the absolute non-negotiable top priority. And if that's going to be the case, then customers are going to start to wonder whether new technologies, new initiatives, new policies have their best interests at heart, or if they're just about the brand kind of cutting corners and defending everything. And so I think it's really important that we understand where we're going wrong, what we need to improve, because customers have to feel like their voice is being heard and the improvements in moving in the right direction. And so with that, I want to kind of move to a poll question here and actually ask our audience, how they feel, about the biggest improvement areas. So you should see this on your screen right now. So which of the following CX improvements do you feel is most important to your customers? Don't be shy. It's unanimous or anonymous. Sorry, we're not going to know if you did this or not, but we are going to know whether you filled it out. We want to see the right answer. So do you think the bigger emphasis should be on personalization, more channel options, proactive support, a better balance between AI and humanity? Or do you think that all my answers there are terrible? You have something completely different. You want to go with none of the above? Whatever it is, we're happy to have you fill that out. So we'll give you a moment to fill that out. We know it may still be loading for some of you on your screens. It should appear in the slide window for those who are following along, just in case you're wondering where the poll is. We'll give a few minutes here, and then we will Keith and I will grade your responses and let us know if we agree or disagree or what we think, the trends are here. And I think this is, obviously in many ways it's a trick question, because the truth is that there's probably no one right answer, but Keith, certainly curious to see kind of what ends up attracting the majority here.
Yeah, my money is on more personalized engagement, Brian. As you know, you and I have done this a long time, as I'm sure people listening have. And that notion of chasing personalization has been something for the better part of 20 years service leaders have been trying to achieve. So I'd be surprised if we don't end up there, but we'll see what the audience thinks here.
Yeah, let's move forward here. I think there's still people who haven't done it yet, but they have more polls coming up. You'll have a chance to make up for this missed opportunity here. So actually it was kind of split. We kind of saw two things pop up here: proactive support and personalized engagement. So Keith, I have my thoughts here, but you're the expert. You're the one I hyped up here. I want to give you a chance to jump in with how you see this breakout here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. Proactive to support is deflecting the future interaction, right? And so much of what service leaders are fighting are those micro trends, the seasonal trends, the product defect, the environmental thing they hadn't anticipated, that being able to be proactive to deflect where they have a staffing issue and they haven't workforce planned for this is certainly an easy win. And as you see more and more in the travel hospitality space, especially and in retail, those mobile notifications that are getting ahead of and deflecting an inquiry in the future have been super helpful to customers and great customer experiences as well. So that's just a few thoughts about that.
Yeah, what I would weigh in here is that I actually think I'm going to give you credit here. I think your answer about personalization was right. And the reason is that I believe that what we're increasingly seeing in our space is that there needs to be a sense of why behind personalization. And so whereas, historically it's just like, oh, they know your name, they know your order, they say hello, they're friendly. Yeah. That was sort of masquerading as this notion of personalization. I think we're increasing at a point now where personalization is, what are we doing with it? And proactive support is one of the best use cases of personalization. When you know who the customer is, what they value, what they're trying to achieve, you then can get to a point where you're anticipating their future needs. So suddenly you're not just using customer data to show off all the stuff you know about that customer. You're using it to make their experience better, to deliver real value, to save them time. And so by being proactive, that is taking personalization and operationalizing it into a real outcome for the customer. So I see that as very closely connected to personalization, but it's just a way to actually go there. Now, again, these are improvement areas, certainly ways we can make our current experiences better. But as I said in my intro, it's not just about solving today's challenges. It's not just about knowing today's customer. We're really trying to understand how expectations are evolving, how the customer is getting different. And so I want to start there with you, Keith, really looking at what are some trends in terms of customer expectations, new things that you think customers are looking for, and maybe how does that overlap with some of the innovation that's happening in our space as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm looking forward to you joining me at this one. But let me start with, we have this notion of your best interaction is your next interaction, and that's an expectation. So if my bank can do this, if my insurance company can do this, if my airline, why can't this company I'm dealing with do this? And do this being deliver a great customer experience. So every service leader on the planet is fighting against that, regardless of the regulatory or compliance environments, regardless of the complexity that they may have. That's a customer expectation. What is driving that, I think, is our lives are so highly curated with AI now. My car is totally personalized to me. My entertainment is totally personalized to me. My home is personalized to me. The optimized route to get to the store or to work is personalized for me. And so AI has given us this expectation that the service experience I get when I move out of those expectations is going to be similar. And as you know, there's this huge gap today. So that's a little bit of where we see this expectation rising, and AI is the undercurrent. But curious to have your thoughts on that, Brian, before we delve into the next one.
Yeah, you hit on what I see as a really important, it might have seemed contradictory 10 years ago when we were having rudimentary discussions about the digital transformation AI, but it has become the real focus. And that is the idea that this technology reinforces how important personalization is. So again, when you're thinking about, okay, in the traditional voice channel where you're having a conversation with a phone agent, they're looking at some computer, you probably assume it's very messy, convoluted dashboard. You can probably understand if they have to ask you a repetitive question. Not that you like it, you feel frustrated, but you're like, hey, you know what? I work in an office. I know systems are disintegrated, they're disconnected. I get that they have to jump through all these hoops and ask me very basic questions, that they don't always operate as if they know me and can anticipate my needs. But now that we're interacting with digital, where you log in, I'm logging in, I'm giving you my username. Right. I see my entire account history, all my support inquiries, all my bills, everything I've asked right on that screen. I expect that to be actioned in some way. I expect it to drive a better experience. So when I interact with your digital channels and my username's at the top of the screen, but your first question is, who are you? What are you interacting about? That really sends a message that you don't know me. And that starts to build that lack of trust, that feeling as if I'm just a number, I'm just a buyer and not someone that you value as a customer. So interestingly, even as we get low touch and don't always have a true agent-led interaction, we're actually getting to a point where that expectation of recognizing them as a human, recognizing them as a person with unique needs and proclivities, though it's going to become even more important. And so that totally makes sense there. And I think really what we also want to look at is so much of this has also been sold on convenience, right? It's been sold on now you can get quality service in any channel you want on your own terms. It doesn't have to be business hours. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter where you want to go. You can get this great service. Then when you actually interact with them and it turns out that you're starting from scratch every time, that it's not convenient, that you have to repeat information, that you have to log in, that you have to kind of ask your question in 55 different ways, it negates that entire promise of convenience and starts to really show that we have a long way to go. So I think that duality is going to be really important. One, if we promise convenience, we have to act on it. We have to make sure that our experiences are seamless, are frictionless, are actually making things easy. I don't want to hear that you can use self-service for a simple customer issue, and then it turns out that the customer has to spend 20 minutes figuring out how to ask the question. That's not convenience. That's not self-service. Self-service is doing it in a way that's better for them. And secondly, knowing who they are, and at every touch point, using that knowledge to make the experience better. That's absolutely where we see that going. Now, a lot of what you were teeing up, I mean, I've known you for a while, Keith. I know where your head is right here. A lot of what you were teeing up is this notion of memory-rich AI. That's something that you're very passionate about, that you see a lot of value here. I want to give you a chance to walk through what that means, what it looks like, and how maybe it can solve some of the challenges we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, first, I think we've set a world record because we've had a tech conversation for almost 15 minutes and we waited to say AI until that point. But so congratulations. Look, I think we see this. we've seen this movie before, right? As service leaders, is massive disruptive wave of technology coming that's really helping companies move up that automation curve and think about how they can leverage technology to deliver better customer experience. I think this is since I've been doing this is the biggest one. This is the biggest wave. This is the tsunami. And that consistent theme we hear from customers about remember me, know the context of my interaction, and serve me proactively is where memory-rich AI really has an opportunity to sort of move the needle. So for us, it's really thinking about how do you invest in an agentic service platform where you can retain that memory of the customer, but you can also deploy agentic capabilities, bot capabilities, to serve those high-frequency interactions that are mundane, but also blend in harmony the human agent that can bring the relationship skill or the empathy skill. So that's kind of this notion of memory-rich AI, but that's ensconced in the need for a platform that looks at not just the contact center, but the employee service help desk and the customer service and support systems within a company.
That was going to be my next question. It hits on a really important point here, which is that the more agentic, the more autonomous, the more advanced AI gets, the more data contingent it is, the more that our existing problems as it relates to, inconsistent knowledge bases, inconsistent data, limited data, fragmented systems, these all become more catastrophic. In the current era, you have an employee who, okay, I've dealt with that knowledge base entry for 5 years. I know it stinks. I know it's out of date. I know it doesn't explain everything well, but I've answered so many questions about it that I, as an agent, can translate it. I can make sense of it and explain it in a good way for the customer. When you're talking about agentic AI agents handling this on their own, when you're talking about automating complex processes where that knowledge entry or that CRM entry is so critical, you're not going to have that filter. It's just going to act. And if it acts in the wrong way, it can really hurt your brand. So what should our organization be thinking about as it relates to that framework?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And so I think, as technology vendors and partners in the space, like Zendesk and others, we can do a much better job to help service leaders recognize it's not a technology alone thing. People, process, technology. And what you're referring to really in an operational framework is just that, people, process, and technology. And I think if you look at the way service organizations have been built, much like a lot of other enterprises, is very hierarchical, right? There's a VP of contact center, there's a call center supervisor or director, there are team leaders, and then there are teams. And I think we really have to be careful about not flattening the organization in this agentic era. I think those high inquiry, mundane, repetitive tasks, where frankly AI is better than a human, that's where teams need to be flattened and deployed to drive the automation rates, where they can balance where you need the relationship skill and human factor. So, we really think about, as companies think about how they go up that automation curve, using those frontline teams and putting the tools in their hands to start to build those agentic capabilities. Because as you started to allude to, these are the people that are going to have to handle the interaction when it comes out of an AI agent. These are the people that are going to have to schedule and train the AI agents. And so it's really kind of looking at the organizational framework and really challenging whether the status quo is the right way.
Definitely. And I see a poll that's very relevant to this, an audience question that's very relevant to this question about agentic AI. And I do, Keith, want to in a moment give you a chance to dive into that. But before we get there, I feel like there's a poll that everyone can participate in. And that is really when you look at the idea of frontline customer experiences. So when you're talking about that actual service or support or sales interaction between consumer and brand, what do you see as the ideal balance between AI and humanity? So we've given you 4 conceivable options here. So one is AI is still mostly about information sharing. The actual engagement is sitting with the human. The second is that AI is doing basic transactional support, but if there's any complexity, it does get escalated. Then we get into more where AI is actually very much the face of your brand, but humans are still there in the loop to, if exceptions need to be made or critical thinking is required. And then finally, we have one where humans are no longer doing customer support. That's all AI, and humans are taking on more of a back office, back end role. Gave you 4 options here. Curious to see where the audience lands. Keith, I want to, we can kind of talk through this for a second while they're filling this out. Where do you maybe?
This is going to be a tough one. I think this is going to correlate very directly to the industry folks are in, Brian. I would venture the guess that, the more sort of B2B tech startup oriented are going to be option D. The most highly regulated, compliance oriented are going to be closer up to the A's or the B's. But that's just kind of my 2 cents. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that's a good prediction, but I would say that I'd challenge whether that needs to be the case over time, because I
That's a
think
good point. Yep.
if you go back to your operational framework point,
Yep.
once you
Yep.
start to properly audit your data, your records, your knowledge, your processes, you then could argue that actually AI is going to be more consistent. It's going to be less prone to human error. It's going to hit those compliance needs a lot better. And so there's actually a case to be made that, hey, you're dealing with highly sensitive issues. You're dealing with where you need to say it exactly right to honor your compliance requirements. That might be a case where automation makes sense. So I would say that yes, in the short term, I do think the more complex and high stakes the interaction, the probably more likely we are to say it belongs with a human. But I would question whether that always needs to be the case. And let's dive into what the audience said here. So right now, I think they're going with, overwhelmingly what was kind of that big cliche in the industry probably aligns, Keith, with where you were thinking, which is, AI for simple, humans for complex. And we did see a little bit around the idea of humans staying in the loop. So AI is that front line, but you have a human involved. And I like that one because I think that one really gives you a lot of flexibility. Still lets you have humans that are there when empathy or complex thinking is required, but it does allow you to have a more scalable organization. I think the key there is going to come down to how serious are we going to be with letting this in the loop human actually, or this human in the loop actually make decisions? Because our data shows that right now, only 6% of companies give the frontline human agent freedom to make their own decisions about approval, about make goods and exceptions and compensation. And if they don't have that approval, then it doesn't matter if they're in the loop. They're not going to be able to do anything in an efficient way. So if you're part of the 11% who chose the human in the loop, you have to make sure that you're giving that human empowerment to actually do something that the customer facing AI can't do.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I just want to tie back one thing, Brian. We talk about the rise in customer expectations. One of the things customers are doing, as you know, is they're using LLMs to look at policy language, to look at T's and C's, to look at things that previously they didn't have that tool to do. And that's equipping them when they go to a service interaction to sometimes be one step ahead of the agent around policy questions and things like that. So that's just a voice to the argument of let's unleash frontline agents and empower them as much as they can to make decisions, because they have a much more knowledgeable consumer about very technical things, courtesy of the LLMs, that they didn't before.
Yeah, and I think also the consumer, I mean, we often forget, like, self-service doesn't begin with a highly complex AI interaction. Self-service really begins when the customer runs a web search or looks through your website and looks through your knowledge base. And so they're familiarizing themselves with the gist of your policy and your scripted answers. If they're engaging, it's because they want something different, whether it's a better explanation, they can't figure out how their issue fits into your policy, or they want something more. And so I think you have to really start to think about not only like what is your balance as far as can it understand what the customer is asking, but what is the appropriate balance of AI and humanity as it relates to giving them a resolution that aligns with what the customer is looking for. So certainly a lot to digest there, but I want to get your take on, you gave your predictions, you gave your thoughts, you gave your devil's advocate argument, but I want your argument on really what you see as the best way to leverage AI within a customer-facing operation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we look at this through the notion, and you said it, so you led me right into this, Brian. Thank you. Resolutions. Our whole ethos is resolutions for all, and I just want to take a few minutes and talk about that. What we've built in our resolution platform is a system that can, across 72 hours, across contact center, employee service, and customer service and support, resolve an issue for a customer. I think as you started around kind of all the hype around personalization, I don't care if you use my name when I call. I just want you to actually resolve the issue. And I don't want a closed ticket on your side to require another interaction from me. So that's kind of where we're moving the sort of North Star around resolutions. And look, it's not just a marketing thing. This is how we're pricing, right? So we're challenging this notion of seat-based software pricing, and we're sort of saying it's resolutions for the win. So whether AI is in or out of the picture, this is the next wave of automation. take all the fancy agentic language out. That's all it is. And if you're a service leader, you saw web, you saw mobile, and in those experiences, as you might recall, there was this notion that inquiries are going to go down. Go shut down the contact center, right? Because they're all going to self-serve. What happened? Actually, the inverse. They went up. And so the rate of automation isn't keeping pace with the rate of inquiry right now, because it's still like those things are neck and neck, and it's a neck and neck race. So I think as you chase 80% automation, if that's the North Star, just think about how you're deploying that in the smartest ways. And this maybe gets us into the next section.
Yeah, I think it's not only about like, are you deploying for the right use cases, but also like what new use cases or what new inquiries are you creating by virtue of this? So yes, you may get rid of one lingering nagging issue that your agents are sick of dealing with because you've successfully automated it. But by virtue of having customers have to learn a new tool, have to navigate the journey differently, you may create 5 new questions for especially across different demographics who may either have like a tech fluency challenge or may just be philosophically resistant to the idea of not speaking to a human, and suddenly they're going to have more questions. And so just because you can pinpoint, okay, here's a problem that AI can solve really well, it's bigger than that when you're thinking about what this means for your overall interaction. Now, I do want to get to kind of tie in the question we have from the audience, which is sort of what does agentic AI look like? Because obviously agentic AI is built on autonomous action. It's built on delivering resolutions, and that's good. That aligns with what you said was the North Star. However, if the resolutions are not good for the customer or not within the risk and trust level of the business, then that's going to create new concerns. So as we start to design AI experiences for not for what we think is cool on a webinar, but for what customers are actually looking for, where do you see agentic AI maybe working and perhaps not working in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we, kind of coin this phrase of, AI is for the instant and not the intimate. So if you think of the, 60 to 7% of the interactions that are the instant, those are people looking for an order status, trying to reset a password, trying to do very kind of quick hit interactions. The intimate is where you need the relationship skill or the empathy or the expert around product or policy. And so that's kind of how we're thinking sort of some of them balance goes. And so much of how we're trying to arm the agent with these AI capabilities is with this notion of a co-pilot. So, think about a super intelligence that an agent has because they're being fed information in real time in the interaction about how they should drive the conversation. And as you see, many companies are being very transparent about the fact through the chat experience or through the mobile experience that this is a company branded agentic experience, right? This is a bot you're dealing with. And I think that's the right kind of disclosure that they want to have so that people know there is a decision point that I can now make as a customer that is talk to an agent, right? And you see that in the chat experience, and you see that very transparently being saying, okay, thank you, Brian. I'm going to transfer you to someone now. So I think that's the kind of transparency that people should be looking for.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, as you said, a lot of strides there. I think brands are no longer trying to trick you as much on AI. I think they're being much more clear about what it does. Also, the technology is becoming more advanced. And when we think about, okay, we know from our data, your data says similar things, that experiences are not as convenient as they should be. They're not as personalized as they can be. These are all things that AI is capable of addressing. It can make experiences faster. It can surface more context and more information. So it should be universally embraced as this is the answer to all these pain points we've had. And yet we know that so many customers are still saying representative, agent. They're still saying, feelings that they're getting a lesser outcome. So where is the disconnect and what do we have to avoid moving forward?
Yeah, I think the disconnect is we're trying to solve the self-service issue and not resolve the customer issue. And there is a discrete difference, right? In that point solution, where it's about lowest cost of interaction, because there's enormous cost pressure on service leaders, it stays. It's how do you optimize that experience? And I think we're doing that at the expense of, am I really resolving the issue for the customer? Let me give you an example. And by the way, just because you can automate 80% of the interactions doesn't mean you should, right? And where does the 80% come from? There's some boardroom, there's someone out there who has bestowed upon us, you can automate 80%. And I'm not sure that that's a universally accepted truth, But if you pursue automation at the expense of the customer experience, you would be repeating some of the sins in history in the contact center that we've seen, right? It's just in the first time. But let me give you a simple one. You've got a billing issue. We have them all the time. You know what? Companies make mistakes on bills. They send a lot of them out. And you want to talk to someone or you need a $20 credit on your bill. With a point solution, it's not that hard to say, thanks, Brian, we've resolved the issue. You'll see the credit. But maybe you're in the wrong plan, right? Maybe an agent can talk to you about, you signed up for plan X. You should really be in plan Y, because I don't see you using all the things that are in plan X. And I think I can save you a couple of bucks a month in plan Y. And what a more sticky experience now my company has had with a customer instead of just deploying the credit at the point solution.
Yeah, I think that is, again, thinking about like what's going to add value for the customer and what is the best way to do that. Is it in that moment an automated outcome? Is it an agent-led outcome? But putting the idea of the standard being what's going to be best for the customer, that's going to be so critically important there. Now, one other thing I want to get into before we dive into the human side of this equation is the notion of AI across channels. So when we talk about AI self-service, I think we've all been guilty of using it synonymously with the idea of a chat bot, a web-based interface where it's text and that's what you're interacting with. But the truth is today's AI can span all of your contact channels. And we want to ask a poll question here, which is when you think about your AI self-service priorities, which of those channels that you see on the screen right now do you see as the biggest opportunity for AI self-service? So are you looking for email? Are you looking for more traditional voice or phone interactions? Are you looking for social media, messaging and chat? Or, there are other channels out there. So if it's none of the above, or if you just don't want to do AI self-service altogether, you can put none of the above as well. Give you a moment to figure that one out. But Keith, I don't even want to ask you to predict this because I do know what we want to cover next. So I know where we're going here, but have you seen any kind of interesting use cases or anything you want to discuss as it relates to the idea of omni-channel AI?
Yeah, I think generally you could correlate this to an AI maturity curve, right? And sort of see are you in the early adopter? If you're using fully voice agentic capabilities, you are an innovator. You're right there on the leading curve. If you haven't deployed it for email yet, you're probably at the under end of the curve, right? With the auto response. And it's not just a thanks for your email, right? Acknowledgement. It's actually an intelligent reply that's resolving your issue. So, and some of those other channels are somewhere in between in that curve.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's going to be really key is, again, first of all, it really does have to align with what your customers are looking for, not only in terms of what your data shows, here's where they go for their issues, but what their expectations are for interactions in those channels. Because I think a lot of us historically think, okay, something like a text message is very short. It's very, it doesn't have a ton of flowery language or personality. Perhaps that makes the most sense for automation. But if they have a specific expectation for tone, for resolution style in that environment, and they don't feel as if the AI can deliver for them there, then even though it seems like it might be more intuitive or easier, it could actually create more concern. So I think you really want to understand not only where customers are going, but what their ideal communication looks like and what's the easiest to automate. And so I am curious what we're going to see as a response here. So yeah, so again, this probably makes the most sense. I think that social media, certainly there's opportunities there, but I also know that, hey, this is public facing dialogue. If you're risk averse at all, you may be most risk averse for, am I going to let an AI communicate on behalf of my brand to millions of people? And email might just seem like too long, or it might just seem too obvious to spot that chat GPT kind of tone or whatever in there. But I think you start to get into voice and messaging, you start to see more traditional customer service use cases. Does this surprise you at all here, Keith?
It surprises me to see nobody on email. I would say this audience is pretty sophisticated. To do fully agentic voice interactions end to end, that's something. But with email, with agentic email, reply, we see customers having great success resolving customer issues through email. And so I'm just surprised that we had no responses there.
Well, I guess the key is we do say the biggest opportunity. It wasn't to check all the above, so it's possible that ranks as number 2 or 3.
Yeah.
But I will say that maybe the other explanation, though, Keith, is that maybe they actually got a sneak peek of our slides here, because I know that you definitely want to spend a little bit of time on voice AI specifically. And this is something that from our data, we see more positivity, more positive customer sentiment around voice AI than we do text-based automation. And I think that that really speaks to a really enormous opportunity we have here. So Keith, what do you see as the value of kind of prioritizing voice AI as a way to really make transformation within the customer contact function?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really exciting frontier here, right? So this just a few weeks ago, Siri turned 14, right? So for 14 years, whether it was Siri or Alexa or our television or our car or our thermostat, we've been talking, right, to agentic, bot capabilities in some form or other. So I think there's kind of mass consumer acceptance of conversing with a bot, and it's crazy. You read every day about people that have AI agent therapists and are they're in relationships with AI agents. So I think we have sort of mass adoption here. Second, this is the most natural form of most natural interface a company can have is people talking to each other. And you probably were around for those days of proclamations where voice was dead and everything was going to be digital and self-service. It's like actually voice interactions continue to go up, right? And so I think this is a fantastic opportunity for what has previously been non-voice agentic capabilities to become end-to-end voice agentic capabilities. The other thing I would say in the sort of camp of the voice AI agent is they're better at alpha noom. Every customer needs to be ID'd and verified in a contact center interaction for compliance and regulatory reasons. Most agents aren't doing that because they want to make you repeat information. But repeating my customer number, my social, my address, and things like that, voice AI actually does a better job at some of those things. So I think those areas you can start to think about where you prioritize voice AI. I think that's the short-term opportunity. I think the longer-term opportunity is a full end-to-end conversation with your brand's equivalent of Alexa on a voice channel. That is what we have had with a human agent in the past.
Yeah, and from our research, we found that difficulty explaining their issue was the number one reason that consumers choose to bypass self-service in favor of speaking to a live agent. And when you think of what voice fundamentally does, it allows you to talk through your issue. Now, obviously, recognizing accessibility limitations and all that, I think that one of the reasons why the typical consumer who has access to the idea of kind of communicating via voice chooses phone, regardless of demographic right now, is because they feel like when they really need to say, here's what I'm going through, here's how I feel about it, that is the most natural way to do that. And so if we can accommodate their most natural communication arena, understand it really well, and then make relevant decisions, whether it's an agentic AI actually solving the problem, whether it's kind of gathering that information, learning from it, passing it to a human agent, that is going to be the forum for the most natural communication. That's going to build that trust. That's going to build that understanding. That's going to make them feel like this effort they're putting in is bringing them closer to that resolution they're looking for.
Yeah, and look, this isn't a zero-sum game, Brian, right? Like, so if you think about it, if my AI agent failed in the chat interaction, I probably shouldn't answer your call with an AI agent, right? Like, probably didn't make sense. But if I initiate my interaction, maybe a voice AI agent is the right modality for me there. And the harmony I might have with a human is still there, right? There's still the opportunity. The voice AI agent is doing ID and verify. They might be doing an order tracking thing. But this is what I think the opportunity for service leaders is. How do you program in those moments of joy that only a human can bring, right? A voice AI agent might be able to tell me when I'm calling to check on the status of a mortgage application, hey, Brian, you've been approved. Wouldn't that be a better experience coming from a human, right? Wouldn't I be able as a bank to sell you more products for your home, insurance products, for example, if instead of answering that call with a bot, I'm making that call with a person and I'm saying congratulations and there's empathy and warmth in my voice. So these are the kind of considerations we need to think about when we think about voice AI in the future, and that it's not a zero-sum game.
Well, yeah, and I think you also hit an important point, which is that we can't take this binary approach to AI and humanity. It can't be like, what do we think is simple enough for AI to do or emotion-driven enough for the employee to do? Because there are even going to be, to your point, technically, intellectually simple issues where there's still a huge opportunity to have the human touch involved. And as AI gets more advanced, there are going to be complex matters where it's actually far better at figuring out what's going on and providing the resolution. So we can't look at everything as AI that humans that. We have to look at the synergy between the two, leading to our next discussion here, which is what do you see as the role of humans in the AI age?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of an existential question, right? It's like, how do I, as a middle-aged manager, keep my job, right? But I think for service leaders that have lived through these generations of technology change, a lot of those kind of came from the top. You started the webinar talking about, like, let's take this out of the boardroom and let's have this conversation with the real folk doing the work. And I'm pretty passionate that this should come from the front line. And what specifically should come? Understanding and identifying where and how AI is deployed in contact centers, in service, and giving the teams the tools and the capability to do that. I mean, who better to do that? So, of course, there's a lot of fear and trepidation that AI is going to take my job. And as you know, Brian, agent turnover continues to be an issue in contact centers. It isn't going away. It's, depending on the industry, 30, 40+% sometimes on average. So of course there's an immediate cost savings opportunity that industry leaders are looking at to go and put an AI where a human used to be, because they work 24/7, 365. But I think it's really the careful planning around what kind of interactions do we want to agentify with bot interactions, and where do we want the human? And I think the programming and the balancing of that needs to come from frontline service workers. So there's a whole new generation of jobs that are coming, that are jobs that agents can fill. And we're super excited about what that looks like in the near future. It's really a change management imperative for service leaders.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we also have to remember is that what we decide is the vision by looking at customer data, by looking at voice of the employee data, that's step one. Step two is then getting our teams ready for that vision, because it is going to be a change. And the biggest mistake is that, we assume that, any change is just instant. It's just, we take for granted that can happen. But the truth is that, just because humans in theory might have certain strengths over AI doesn't mean they've been in position to activate those strengths, use those strengths, hone those strengths. And if we don't create an environment where they can do so, they're not going to live up to their potential. They're not going to play the complementary role they should with AI. And what's going to end up happening is the customer escalates thinking they're going to get an expert. They actually don't get an expert. They're mad. They take that out on the agent. The agent's like, well, this job isn't for me. They leave. You then have to retrain, redevelop the experience. You create a real vicious circle. So I think Roy's starting to map out, not only do what we wish the agent should do, but what are we doing to get them ready for it is going to be so crucial. And that does lead us to our final poll question here, which is, as we look at the next generation of work, as we look at the future of the agent, which of these training areas do you see as the top priority? So a lot of popular ones that I'm sure our audience sees a lot. We have soft skills, complex product and topic mastery, familiarity and fluency with AI, and kind of a better sense of the why and the vision behind the business. So take a moment to answer these. Again, as we've done throughout the webinar, Keith, anything you want to comment on as it relates to these options here?
Yeah, I mean, I love all of these options. I think that, I worked in service part of my career. And so I have a lot of empathy for the person you alluded to who doesn't have access to a system or who doesn't have the knowledge that they need. There is nothing worse than being in an interaction with a customer and not being able to handle what they're asking for, not to be able to give them the information you want, either because you're locked out of a system or somebody hasn't trained you. So, part of where I'm leading is, from the heart here around sort of complex product and topic mastery is there's an opportunity to make the agent an absolute superhero of your brand with AI if you do it right. And that's kind of where I lean into.
And where I see is maybe being a slight debate there. I think you're 100% right, but where I see maybe a superficial debate emerging is on the idea that, hey, AI is going to make accessing knowledge so much easier that we don't have to spend as much time conditioning them on the raw data, the facts, because they're going to be one quick search or one automated next best action prompt away from the answer to their question. Let's instead cultivate how to use that information to make a connection. However, the counter to that, which brings me back to your side, Keith, is that we can put everything we want in a fancy interface. It can pop up all the time. If the agent doesn't understand the why, doesn't understand how we arrived at this policy, why it makes sense what we're trying to achieve, then the second the question is slightly different than the way it was listed in the knowledge base, or they're looking for something slightly
Right.
different than the usual outcome, they're not going to be able to make the right decision. And so they really have to know not only like what the knowledge base says, but what this means in the context of the individual customer. And that's going to require a more advanced understanding of the topic, a clearer sense of the product, probably more firsthand use of the product to know here's what it's like to go through this support process. Here's what I need. So a lot of things there, but let's jump to the answers here. So a little bit of a mix, but definitely soft skills sort of won the day, and then complex topic mastery and AI and fluency and familiarity were next up. I mixed thoughts here. Again, I think we all know that we're talking about AI can't as easily simulate emotional empathy, real world experience. These are areas where soft skills are certainly important. We know that odds are if the customer goes all the way through the bot, gets to the human, they might be a little bit more heated. So I see de-escalation. I like that a lot. So I can't argue that. But what I am encouraged to see here is AI fluency, because the truth is that there are right and wrong ways to prompt an AI. There are right and wrong ways to navigate this. And those skills have to be important.
Yeah. And look, I think you see this a lot, like AI is going to do the mundane and the high frequency and the easy stuff, and people are going to do the relationship stuff. Not all agents are great at relationship stuff. Not all agents are empathetic, right? Some are more commercially oriented. Some may be more product oriented. Some may be, more soft skill oriented. So I think we just have to be careful that we don't sort of apply a single brush stroke to agents or for human and relationship oriented things, when you may actually go back to some of the examples I gave, a human to be a product expert for a certain profile customer. Can they get that information through my website? Maybe, but maybe it's better if I have somebody walking you through that in a screen share, for example.
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important point, which is that because we can acknowledge, like, again, we might have disagreements, or not only between us, but between the entire customer contact universe about the right balance between agents and humans and AI, but we can agree that AI will absorb some work. It will absorb some of what today's agents are doing, which means that you have more free time, more availability, more capacity. What that should mean is that you have more chance to now allocate your resources to the right situation for them and for the customer. So you can route based on personality, skill set, strengths and weaknesses. There's you're squandering that opportunity if you just try to force everyone to the same box. Instead, say, now these are the right people for de-escalation. These are the right people for highly complicated technical questions. Let them play into those strengths, because now you have the availability to do that. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, in that instead of trying to say, what is that one size fits all super agent, say, no, what is going to overall create the best ecosystem for our customers? And how can we develop those individual skills across the board?
Yeah.
So with that, I want to hit on one final point here, which is we've talked about training, we've talked about competency gaps, but the cultural side as well. I know that, we've kind of culture, happy agents equal happy customers. This has always been something that we talk about in our industry, but I want to argue that maybe it's taken a little bit of a back seat recently. I know we had, COVID and the pivot to remote work, maybe de-emphasized the role of the traditional office. We have a lot of dialogue mocking the pizza party, how it's not really culture. It's just kind of like a short-sighted thing. And so I almost wonder that we've gotten too transactional at times. But if we're talking about cultivating humanity and human skills, and especially we see so much of our audience looking for soft skill development, I would imagine that we need to recommit to the idea of the agent experience, the culture, the sentiment they have. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big issue for not just in service, but in every company in the world. Workforce disengagement, right? And more screen addiction, and more work from home, and less of the relationship skills that people used to covet through the workplace, through the job, through the affinity they have for their company. And the things they value from a company they work for are very different than they were 5 or 10 years ago, right? Some of that's driven by the macro. I think what's really important here is to not allow employees to be part of and in the tent on the change management you're making on the culture. That's where I was getting into sort of flatter organizations. And who better in a service organization to know where to deploy agentic capabilities than the people that are dealing with customers every day, right? And I think that can help sort of move the cultural curve. And I think some of the jobs that agents can see themselves evolving into, there needs to be an AI service architect, anyone's AI is only as good as their knowledge. Who's going to fuel those knowledge bases? Who's going to feed them? Who's going to train the AI agents? Who's going to system design for you? These are all great career opportunities for agents that I think can kind of help people move out of that, I'm a team lead, I'm a supervisor, to I have an agentic job. By the way, it makes them a lot more marketable. They also have to have technology that has their back. I didn't talk about our resolution learning loop, but part of the learning that can improve a service interaction through a platform like ours is a system that learns and not just a single agent that has to be all knowing and has to be fed with some agentic capability. So those are just a couple of thoughts, Brian. What do you think?
Yeah, I think two major takeaways from what you said there, just as we move toward the end here. One, culture really needs to be defined from the voice of the employee. And I think one of the reasons why we have that, like, does the pizza party matter or not, is because in some organizations, it was like, I don't really want to listen to my employees. I'm just going to throw some gift cards or parties at them and force them to go to a retreat and they're going to be happy. And that wasn't what the organization was looking for. In others, it's a more social organization. They want to get to know each other. They want to have fun. That might be an area where that softer, more culture-oriented stuff makes sense. The key here is that you have to be looking at what's going to motivate your employees, what's going to make them embrace change, what's going to allow them to navigate an increasingly murky, uncertain, and frankly, challenging work experience. They're going to be handling bigger issues, more demanding customers. What's going to help them get through that? That's really what culture is going to be important. And the second thing is, you made a great point about redefining the role, because some of those are careers. They're not, hey, I do this to pay the bills. That is, I can have a 20, 30-year career that's very lucrative for me if I stay on the track of really mastering AI tuning, AI development, like learning how it interacts with customers. The key there, though, is to be very transparent about what that's going to look like, what it's going to take for an employee to pivot into that role. Because I think the mistake we're making now is we say, oh, yeah, you're not going to have as many forgotten password requests, but you'll just write all of our knowledge entries and tune our bots. And we're not like saying, well, are we paying you more? Are we changing the role? Are we training you? Like, what does your career look like? We just say stuff. And I think we have to be very clear. What is in it for the employee? What are we doing to get them ready for that? And how is this going to work? And when we're transparent about that, they're going to see a lot more value in these new opportunities that they have before them.
Yeah, and you have to be careful as you do that. You don't want them designing the end of their own role, right? Like, so, I think that notion of transparency around where you have high agent turnover and you're always behind the staffing curve you need to be in front of, you're just making but you're bringing agents into that conversation with you. I think it's really important. And we could have a whole session around this. And this is a fascinating question.
For sure. And the good news is, though, we've gotten some more questions, and one of which actually takes the place of, our final discussion topic here, which is from the future perspective. So I actually think the audience member here said, what is one thing a service leader needs to do to be successful in 2026? I see that as a great way to sort of get into this future conversation. So what is your answer to that, Keith?
This automation target is coming. I mean, they have it today, but there are too many boards and there are too many C-suites that are reading in Harvard Business Review and having McKinsey and every consultant in the world tell them, agentify the service function. And if you haven't heard from them yet, you will soon. And so what does that mean? That means just more automation. And understanding how you're going to move up that automation curve, that's the single thing you have to do. Where you're going to deploy and mature easy, quick win increments of automation versus where you're going to hold back, and you're going to have the conversation around why 80% doesn't make sense for your company. So I think that's a long answer to what seems like a simple question, but I just want, we all care passionately about this audience, and we want to equip them to be ready to handle that.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's just important to really, redefine. I don't want to say like back to the basics, because frankly, the basics weren't good enough. We shared the data earlier. The basics were how we have customers who aren't that thrilled with the experience right now. We have to do more, but there's the fundamental notion of deciding what a good customer experience looks like and starting with that notion and then figuring out how we allocate resources, whether they're automated, whether they're manually led, whether they're humans, AI, to get to that outcome. And I think that right now the mistake we're making is we're saying, okay, here's our experience. Can we offload some of this work? Can AI do this well enough where we don't lose a step? But the problem is our current state of the experience is not good enough. It's not what we want. Customers are demanding more. So we shouldn't be trying to figure out how do we just like more efficiently get to where we are now. We should decide what is the value we want to add. And then how can we use that balance of technology and humanity to get there? Because that's what's going to give us that real relationship with the customer. That's what's going to put us ahead of the competition. That's what's going to drive success. And then do have one question before we wrap up, and then certainly, Keith, any final thoughts you want to add here? But this question is asking about outbound agentic AI and specifically voice opportunities. So we talked a lot about how it can help understand the customer. You start to allude to outbound a little bit, but I want to know if you have any more you can share as far as, do you see voice AI playing a role in making, more effective proactive engagement, more effective sales calls? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think this whole outbound market has moved from this sort of mass volume sort of spray and pray approach to highly targeted, highly contextual, highly personalized outbound interactions, understanding sort of the state of the customer, where they are on the journey with you, and understanding their intent if you're going after someone who's a prospect. So for me, those are the really cool things. And then knowing, where do you play a male voice versus a female voice in terms of an agentic capability, because you get a better hit rate with that. There's a lot of art and science that goes into this, and better conversion rate for the company, better customer experience for the customer. So, yeah, great question, Henry.
And I think that hits on my point about the notion of adding value. Is that if there's one directive I want to leave for attendees with going into 2026, it's stop thinking about things that you wish your agents didn't have to do, and start thinking about things you wish your agents could do, but due to current resource limitations, they can't. And there are things like proactive outreach, appointment setting, relationship building, onboarding interactions, tailored sales conversations that we just don't have the manpower, we don't have the budgets, we don't have the resources to do the way we want. Well, that is where AI solves a problem. It can now be your outbound vessel, connecting with customers in ways you can't right now, but if you could do it, they're going to trust you more, they're going to believe in you more, you're going to learn more about them, you're going to elevate the experience. So that's that outbound approach is so valuable, because it's saying not what am I doing right now and how can I make it cheaper, more efficient, more scalable, but instead, what do I wish I can do and how can I use technology to get there?
Yeah, no, it's a great lead in, to, what does the future look like? And just to give a couple seconds on that, Brian, if you'd like, but is really these highly blended channel experiences, which are, consistent with how I interact. The way I communicate with my family and friends is how I'm communicating with the companies and the governments I do business with. In-product experience that are richer and more contextual and more relevant to me. The same way my playlist is more relevant every time I listen because it's gotten smarter. And then, again, I come back to where we started. Our focus is resolution, not automation. Automation isn't a full solve for the customer. So thinking about what is the resolution and how happy I am when I can go to my wife and say, I resolved it. Like, that's a point of pride, but it's a point of pride for an agent too, to resolve something for a customer and not have somebody calling back a day later because you just automated what the customer is trying to do. So anyways, that's as you can tell, we're pretty passionate about this. And look, these are exciting times for service leaders. They really are. This isn't the doom and gloom of AI. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to deliver the kind of service every service leader has always wanted to.
Yeah, and that's a great note to end on, Keith. The idea of resolutions, has often been used. I hate to say this, but I'm going to criticize our community for a second. It's often been used to defend poor experiences. We say customers don't care about the glitz and glam. They don't care about the channel. They just care about getting their problem solved. We've all heard some variation of that comment. And there is some fundamental truth to that. But the problem is that what they want as a resolution is not what we've been giving them. It's really solving their problem, is understanding who they are, what's going on contextually at that moment, what they're going to need for the future, what delivers them value. So it's not just answer the question in a scripted way and say, hey, we got their problem solved. No, it's solving the problem that they have, that they feel, and doing it on their in an empathetic way. If we can use AI to make that happen, great, because that's going to mean faster pathways to that resolutions. If it requires a human, we got to use the human for that too. But again, yes, it's all about resolutions, but you don't define the resolution. They define the resolution for what works for them. And when you calibrate that way, that's when you're aligned with customer expectations.
100%. Well said, Brian.
So Well, yeah, well, I appreciate it again, but I might have gotten one
Sure.
well said here, but everything you said was fantastic, Keith. I know that
Thank you.
what I love about you and the Zendesk team, not only are you obviously innovating from a technology standpoint, but you're so research oriented. Every time we work together, every time we write a report, do a webinar, you're coming with well-researched, rooted in what's happening in the marketplace. And that's what we need. We don't need flashy, cool technology.
Yeah.
We need technology that resolves the problems our customers have and generates the value and the changing expectations they're going to be having moving forward. And I know that's very passionate to you. That's something that Zendesk cares about a lot. And so thanks so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to the next one.
Definitely. And
happy
for all of
holidays.
you who joined us, definitely check out more from Zendesk, check out more from CCW Digital, and we will talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.